Margaret Otto is going to be leading the panel discussion, and so we'll need to have Kathleen, Ms. Kerr, Dr. Kerr, Professor Bertoloso, and Margaret up on the screen.
I'll start the panel discussion, and Kathy, since your hand is already raised, I will go ahead and have you initiate the conversation among the panel, and then once the panel is done, we'll open it back up to the group. So keep on going, Kathy.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. I have this irresistible togetherness force to drag Murray Bowen out of his grave, put him on a plane with me to Rome, and to sit in a room and drink enough with Marta Bertoloso until the three of us reach wisdom. So I'm sorry, but that's my, and we can each drink our favorite libation. I want to make a couple of quick points. I think that the highlighting of teamwork is crucial. And I think that there's been a kind of teamwork around implementing Bowen theory in clinical practice and in one's own life that adds up to more in 2022 than when Dr. Bowen was first developing the theory in the 50s and the 60s. And I just want to note that. I want to note that I'm really impressed with the idea of a middle level of explanation. And what kept coming to me is a Toft of the family emotional system. The other is the importance that was placed in the presentation of human judgment about relevancy. And for example, the importance of complementary and auxiliary medicine. I had the interesting opportunity over the years to know a number of people with cancer diagnoses who implemented all different kinds of ways of approaching the problem. And I guess I would say two things stuck out for me. One is sort of how far down the pike the emotional system was at the point that the cancer was recognized, but also the amount of agency that the person operationalized in addressing their cancer or any disease. I had the privilege of sitting with a very good friend in a room many years ago where the surgeon who had done her biopsy came in the room to tell her the results, and I was her ride home. And he asked her whether she wanted me to stay. And she said, if she's up to it, I'd like to have her stay. And then I had the privilege of listening to him describe that she did have a serious cancer and that he had a recommendation as to how to approach it. And I was really struck. This guy was a wise surgeon. And he said, there are two ways to approach this. You become your own doctor and you decide all the decisions about how to treat yourself, and you go from there. And you engage helping professionals to help you implement those decisions. Or you choose the best doctor you think you found in the panoply of doctors out there, and you go with his program of treatment, and you trust that he knows something. He said to her, don't mix those two things up. Those women die. And that phrase has always struck me and stayed with me from that point on. Cancer as a natural phenomenon. It's in the body all the time. I've lost the site, but there was a wonderful study many years ago where they autopsied bodies, and all the bodies had little niduses of cancer all over them that were in harmony with the body and were not becoming metastatic or even neoplastic. And so how do you get to thinking, I got cancer in my body right now, but I'm living in harmony with it. And I'm on top of whatever's going on in my life in a way that it's not going to grow and do me in, which is to think of cancer as a natural phenomenon, not an unnatural phenomenon. And thinking about the family emotional system as an important system, and that cancer within the family emotional system can be a heads up and it can be a gift. I hope I conveyed that in my own presentation. This is not a debate with Dr. Bertoloso, but I do think that Bowen theory brings an extra fillip of viewpoint to the concept of reciprocity, in that reciprocity can happen in a process in relationships that's driven by anxiety and reactivity that can accelerate to become a vicious circle that is not harmonious and life supporting, and that in that context someone can get sick in some kind of way. I think that Dr. Bertoloso also talked about a threshold of numbers, and the way I've thought about that is what I think of in my emergence of a system is there was a perfect storm of convergence, in the sense of that wonderful book, The Perfect Storm, about where there's multiple variables interacting with each other all at the same time. And it's more than multiple regression. It's system, it's interaction between those variables, and those variables energizing each other and pumping each other up, that leads to a climate that's good for a cancer. I guess the last thing I'll say is, and that addresses the question of timing. If you're in a perfect storm, the timing of the development of a cancer is sort of obvious, but how do you know whether you're in a perfect storm until you then you realize, you wake up and realize you're in a perfect storm, and that gives people a choice of exerting agency over what goes on from there. And I think the concept of care versus cure also gives people agency to exert what will be most useful to them. I've watched people with serious diagnoses, cancer and others, exert agency in saying, no, don't give me that. Yes, please give me that, in a way that is useful for them and helps them to gather the strength from the resources around themselves and to improve their chances of surviving. That's a lot, but my mind is alive with the synergy of the last couple of days. I'm going to shut up.
Professor, would you like to respond? And then I'll call on Mike Kerr.
Yeah, and I don't want to take time. I'm learning a lot. If you don't mind, I do prefer listening to others at the moment. Maybe I can add just a quick follow-up on Kathleen's comments, which were beautiful and very important, I think, and very well structured. But yeah, let's move forward and let's listen to others, please.
Okay, Dr. Kerr, you're up.
Oh, well, when I read The Philosophy of Cancer, I had the reaction that it just resonated somehow with Bowen family systems theory. But having listened to Dr. Bertoloso for 2 days, I'm thinking, but oh boy, I didn't appreciate what I was stepping into. This is a way of thinking. And I think the world is lucky to have people who can think like Marta Bertoloso can. That big picture thing is certainly not easy to grasp. The one other comment I'll make, well, two. One is a favorite study I saw was in a magazine circulated here in the States called Family Circle. So it wasn't a alleged medical journal, but this person, the writer, decided to go to various cancer treatment centers and find out the individuals with the with the most aggressive tumors considered untreatable. And then this person decided to follow up with those people and found a fairly large percentage who got past their cancer even with that diagnosis. And so she said, and tried to look at what is it that they did differently. And she got two types of answers. One is that the chemotherapy in great amounts is being offered. And on one set of people, they said, give me everything you've got. I'm not scared of it. Load me up. And the other set of people said, doctor, I'm getting the hell out of here. If I stay here, you're going to kill me. And the survival rate of those two groups was equal. Apparently, they both had survivors. And I think it just indicated there, too, that whatever that will or force is that can change things in the body can manifest. And the last thing I want to say is see what you think of this. I just think of this transition to after what is it, almost 3 billion years of life of single-celled eukaryotic cells. And then they, for some whatever reason, they decide to form into a group. And then for living so much of their lives selfishly, and they're doing what they want to do and reproduce when they want to reproduce, suddenly found themselves in a system with all kinds of regulation involved. And what else do you expect? That the urge to break free in some way isn't a pretty logical thing to do. That's not a very scientific comment. Anyway, thanks for being here. I had no idea what to expect, and there's so many things about your way of thinking that just take a long time to think through. I'm done.
Okay, Kathy, and then go ahead and make your comments, and we'll see if Professor Bertolosa has a comment.
Well, is it weird that Murray Bowen and Marta Bertoloso have the same initials, and that and that both of them use the same word repeatedly? Dr. Bowen would be listening to a presentation in which someone might be describing in a clinical hour intense exigencies converging on them and being in a difficult emotional system and situation. And he would often say, beautiful, beautiful, it's just beautiful. And I'm listening today, and the beautifulness is, if you look at the system, this stuff is, it's predictable. It's of course. And then I'm listening to Marta Bertoloso say, beautiful, it's beautiful. Of course, it's beautiful. Anyway, I just think these were, like Anne of Green Gables said, these are kindred spirits that if there is an afterlife, it would be so much fun to put them together. I'll shut up.
Hopefully there will be also that opportunity, but we have to do something now to change our and to talk with our colleagues. Which, but you are saying, Kathleen and Dr. Kerr, thank you very much. But I am also thanking you all the time, because really it's important what we have been saying and sharing this day. I think I would take seriously, always in a systemic logic and in the logic of emotional, right, system, this this aspect of beautifulness and beauty, right? There is a memory, right, in our genes, in our cells, in our body, in our minds, of beauty. And when we are able, now to be practical, sorry, I don't want to be to be too simple on this point because it's important, but if we would be able to get more people not necessarily involved, because that's up to them, right? It's that's up to each one of us to get involved more directly in a specific way of doing things, of talking about things and blah blah, but at least sharing this feeling, this emotion that there is something beautiful in what we are saying. And I think that this beauty is very much related with having finally, I would say at some point, a unitary vision, right? Understanding, view of things that is not ignoring the complexity. On the contrary, is taking seriously the complexity of the real world, of human beings and so on. But we are human beings. And that's precisely where we can have fun, right? in taking care of others, of ourselves, and so on, and this discovering. And Margaret, this is my only comment. Is when Karen was saying, and also Dr. Kerr was going back to that point, but the importance of agency, right? Agency for human beings, and Eric, also for you, right? The reference to Cosmo, how human beings behave properly in a satisfactory, beautiful way, right? In a natural world. When they are able of agency, that usually means making decisions, and that making decisions actually changes our position in the world, creating new constraints. And on the contrary, we are living in a society that is pushing us all the time towards less constraints, right? We are avoiding, or at least this is the kind of culture. And I think that a lot of cancer are very much related with our incapability or not possibility, right? Impossibility of taking over constraints, of taking over freely, right? Specific constraints. And sometimes that's not possible. We have to acknowledge our limits, but sometimes it is possible. And in some cases, I have some cases in my mind, there are people and they have a beautiful life, they have everything, they have money, apparently they have no emotional stresses because they can change all the time the emotional environment and so on, and they develop cancer. In my opinion, precisely because of that, because they are avoiding, structurally avoiding all the time constraints. Instead, we need the constraints to develop. And we have to choose our constraints, and that's freedom, and that's the pluralism of the human kind, right? But sorry, maybe this is a huge and maybe a provocative point, but to me, listening to you, agency, human agency, making decisions are very much related with the possibility of keeping somehow a plasticity and adaptiveness while being constrained enough not to get lost in the messy, right? in a messy world. But sorry,
I would see that as a good description of regression and the cancer cells wanting to return to the water, as Dr. Vincent described. Any other comments from the panel? And then I'm sure there's lots in the audience, questions or comments. Anything else? Mike, anything else you want to throw in?
Not at the moment.
Okay, I'll go ahead and open it up to the panel. I just think it's fascinating to go from linear thinking and the beauty of systems thinking.
I want to thank all three of you for a major contribution, not only to my thinking, but I think thinking that is that the world needs to hear. So, Dr. Bertoloso, this question is for you, but also for Kathy and Mike. When you think of cancer on the group level rather than the individual level, how would you see thinking about treatment being influenced by that shift in really a different way of thinking, a different paradigm?
Okay, who would like to answer first?
I think that Dr. Kerr has an answer, and probably Kathleen also too. But just to give you a quick example, Mina Wiesel, for example, uses acts on stiffness, on the stiffness of the tissue, and we have different ways, right, to do that. Changing the electrical properties of the membranes, for example, or adding elements or physical elements or chemical elements, right, in the tissue, and so on. So stiffness clearly is a systemic parameter. It's not a cellular parameter clearly, but is able to revert in a plastic phenotype. That's just to give you a very, very concrete example. We can say much more things, but please, Dr. Kerr or Kathleen, add or.
Okay, who's next? Okay, Kathy.
Well, it's a huge question. And I guess my initial reaction is that it's an important question. And coming from a base of Bowen theory, I think that Bowen theory allows the possibility of an individual changing one's position in the group from being impinged by the group to where I like to live when I'm on a good day, which is bring it on. I'm ready for you. Just bring on the worst that the emotional system can throw at me. And I think I'm up to it today. And I think that that's Bowen theory that has permitted me to operationalize that position at key times, which has been self and life affirming.
Thank you.
Mike, did you want
Appreciate it.
to throw anything in, Mike?
I'll let that stand.
Okie doke. On to the next one, please. Is Victoria, are you next?
I'm ready to be. Thank you. This is a question, I think, for you, Professor Bertoloso, but if either of the Kerrs wish it to comment as well. You mentioned energetic states that are more or less stable and that have a history of functioning. How do you characterize energetic states? How would you measure it? How would I take my pulse on my energetic state?
Okay, this is another huge question and research field. Those examples from literature I was referring to referred to genomic functional states.
Okay.
So depending on the integration, the functional integration of the genome that is acting in our cells as a unity. So what is important is the topological structure and the functional organization of the genome more than the specific sequence of the genes. And we do know that this is in fact the case. Depending on how that functioning is integrated, so is robust, allows cells to develop, to differentiate towards different final functional states, or to continue, for example, maintaining a situation, a state of stemness, right? Stem cells are much more plastic than epithelial cells and so on. And that's pretty much related with the energetic state. Well, do you remember one of the last Nobel Prizes working on stem cells? Precisely worked on this kind of evidences, right? In the body, there are cells that can go back somehow to previous energetic states that are somehow more fundamental, energetically speaking. Once we structure the cells, differentiate, they are much more structured, so their energetic state changes. And this possibility of going back and forth, right, in among these different is something that is also related with the plasticity of our body, if it is controlled in the differentiation process, which is a systemic process. When this process escapes the systemic regulation, easily cells go towards neoplastic phenotypes. So how do we measure, how do we see experimentally these energetic states? You can look at the metabolism of the cells. You can look at the amount of calcium, for example, the intake of calcium in mitochondria, for example, that is very much related with the energetic state of the cell. So again, the framework is the same. When we wanted to go in practical terms to see something, to measure something, we can measure different things.
Right.
But the way we measure those different things are very much related with the framework, right? So, for example, if we look at, we did some experiments on this, but if we measure a calcium intake, for example, we know that there are two different waves of calcium in the cells that are very much, this is another story, but that are very much related with the ontogeny of the organism. So depending on how these two waves of calcium are related and are coupled, the cell is in a balanced energetic state or not. Again, proportions are very important, for example, in this kind of observations of analysis. I don't know if I answered or...
Oh, in more detail than I'm educated to understand. But what it stirred me to think, and I'll just say this and then shut up, is that it would be a fascinating book to compile the various ways of measuring energetic states at different levels of functioning in the system. That there would be corollaries, perhaps, and certainly fascinating research between energetic states at different levels. And my head is spinning with what that might look like. Thank you. Ms. Kerr has something.
Oh, Kathy, do you want to make a comment? And then we better move on. We've got 3 in the queue.
Just a very quick one. I think that it would be an analogous process to say, I think, to what Dr. Bertoloso, and maybe after 2 days of virtual contact, I can presume to call you Marta, has described as energetic states, that Bowen theory, I believe, describes a difference in family emotional system energetic states and individuals when they're in regression or when they're in either steady state or progression, and that those are different energetic states of both the individual and the family emotional unit. And the possibility of thinking your way out of a regression towards either what came before when you were on a higher level of functioning, or even more excitingly, pushing the edge towards a slightly improved level of functioning by virtue of having the experience, is, I think, a change in the energetic state. That's the best way I can say it.
Okay, thanks for that, Kathy. Eric, do you want to go ahead?
Professor, what are some of the most fascinating dreams of treatments that could evolve out of this way of thinking that you see on the horizon or even beyond the horizon?
I think, yeah, I think that definitely the relationships, so human relationships, right, are very important. And if we are able to empower, enable, right, this kind of human interactions, we can care definitely of people much better instead of just thinking in functional terms, right, of medicine and so on, and not in problematizing things, but showing and thinking in very positive terms. So it's not a problem having a problem, it's an opportunity, it's a gift, as Kathleen said, right? But this is a completely different mindset, culturally speaking. So it's a huge work, but it's coming up, I think, because it's very much needed. At the biological level, similarly, I think that we should explore much more in detail, yeah, the energetic stories, and thinking and treating, not targeting organs or cells or moleculars as we usually do, right, in biomedicine, actually, but targeting the system. The system, the biological system in our body, for example, that are cleaning, right? So lung, so all the organs are deputed to clean something, or that are related with the emotional transmission hormones, so to the neural system, that means also the macrobiota, right, in our gut or whatever. Or so targeting systems. I am now, I have a PhD student, and she's probably still with us because she was following the conference, but she's studying a medicine that dates back to the medieval in Europe, Hildegard, from yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Hildegard of Bingen?
Yes, exactly. And that medicine, that model is very interesting. And if we have a chance, for example, to listen that story, we should again find a lot of convergences. So there is yeah, again, I think that what is really needed is a change of mind, a change of framework, right? In order to use, to get the most out of all these initiatives, theories, and so on, because they have a great value, but we have to put them together and to create like a sort of collective epistemic awareness that that's the way to go, which does not mean that we have to avoid or to ignore the functional medicine. It's complementary, right? But they are not the same thing. we are targeting different aspects. So there is a new field, a new even business in this sense. Sorry, this is not the question you asked, but the idea is that if we take seriously the systemic approach and the mesoscopic story, we can really find the new observables, and we can be able to develop personalized approaches, having in mind that the organism is at the end of the story finding its own way. So we are helping in this sense, taking care more than curing, right? The organism, because the organism is curing itself, and nature is helping all the time if we respect it. And that's also the Indian philosophy and many other Oriental traditions, right? That are pointing the same direction. So it's an interesting cultural moment, I think, because anyway, sorry, this so considering human beings for what they are, also in science, because we do need to develop new scientific methods and models for this kind of medicine. Or anyway,
Thank you.
huge question.
Mike and Kathy, anything you want to throw in on that? And then I'll ask Barbara for her comment.
Mike, do you want to go first? Do you have a comment?
Oh, no, go ahead. She was asking you, I thought.
Well, I think that this needs to be credited to Victoria Harrison. The phrase lending nature a hand, I think that she's the person who coined that some years ago. And I think that Bowen theory can be conceptualized as one approach that can lend nature a hand to unleash the healing properties within the individual and the system and the physiological level. So I appreciated your comments, Marta.
Thank you, Catherine.
Mike?
No, nothing to add on that right now.
Okay. Okay, Barbara, go ahead and pose your question or comment, please.
Okay, what has struck me was Dr. Bertolosso's comment yesterday about healthy cells are always polarized and polarization is vital to life. That made me, I was thinking all yesterday evening about this and trying to understand it. And the closest I could come was that cell polarity is the asymmetric organization of the cell used for developing specific functions that give the cell its identity. This process of cell maturation is differentiation of which these cells have a specific role to play. And then was also at the same time Dr. Bertolosso's other comment that tumor cells divide symmetrically. And then in hearing Dr. Kerr's presentation yesterday, I heard cancer cells lose differentiation and there's a replication of cells that have lost their identity. And this brought me to the book Cured, which Dr. Kerr had mentioned yesterday, with the theme that those individuals with life-threatening illnesses appear to have survived by reclaiming or changing their identity, in which in their relationship system, they lost their sense of self. So this brings me back to those concepts that I heard yesterday and today by Dr. Bertoloso of asymmetry and polarization. And I kind of heard them in a different light because somehow when I hear those two concepts, I think of them as in a negative light, but I heard those concepts quite differently. And then today, her comment, reciprocity is asymmetrical, just brought more food for thought.
Did you want somebody in particular to respond, Barbara, or? All three?
No one in particular.
Okay, comments from the panel?
I think that Dr. Kerr, you can say something probably.
Okay,
on this,
Mike.
which is a beautiful point, I think.
Oh, I'm going to pass at the moment.
Kathleen? It's yeah, to me, yeah,
I couldn't say it any better than Barbara Broach said it.
yeah, exactly.
I am speechless for a change.
Okay,
Barbara, I think that you already summarized beautifully.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry, Tanya. I just
I'm like,
so-
she's next in line. Go on, Tanya.
she is, and I unchecked her by accident. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry, Miss.
She didn't
Ford.
leave I got my eye on her. Thank you so much, Barbara. And now we'll move on to Tanya.
Hold on, I'm gonna bring Tanya back.
Okay,
She's right here in front of me. I got her.
Okay.
thank you. Again, I'm gonna thank you, Dr. Kerr, Ms. Kerr, and Dr. Bertoloso for this wonderful experience. I've learned so much, especially understanding on this cellular level, the ability to maintain individuality and togetherness, in the essence of adaptability and survival. So I think it started having my gears kind of rotate in terms of like in a brain injury, where you talked about pause, Dr. Bertoloso, where there's a need for pause for the nerves to kind of regenerate itself. It kind of had me thinking along those lines. My question, I think, is, I don't want to say I'm piggybacking a little bit off of Barbara, who just mentioned something, but if anyone can speak a little bit more toward the idea of, or the perception of values, because you talked about values. And when Mrs. Kerr was, did her presentation, I'm able to conceptualize, values and along that line. So I was thinking a little bit more on the cellular level or perspective of the idea of values, and kind of sounds like it maybe ties behind Barbara's kind of thing, because she talks about, she mentioned, the sense of self. And I think even that earlier it was mentioned the energetic state. So I'm open to hearing more and curious about that. If my question makes sense.
I think it makes great sense. And we've got about 2 minutes, minute and a half to go. So I'll ask the panelists to be as succinct as they can. And then we'll turn it over to Carolyn. Great question and comment.
Exactly. It's a great question, impossible to say something relevant in 30 seconds. So just but the maybe what is useful is to consider that, again, human beings, we are human beings. We are not machines. We are not cells. We are not animals. We are human beings. And we have a very specific way, right, to develop and to behave in the natural world, in the real world, and which is mediated, philosophically, anthropologically, evolutionary, mediated by language. Language is our capability of making abstraction of a concept that we can share, and we can share beyond our own life, right? So cultural stories, cultural values stay and survive much longer than us. And that's human beings, right? How we behave and live. And so values are very important. Values can be in different cultures, can be understood in terms of principles okay, I'm saying values because I'm using a word that I know that in US and Europe we understand in the same way, but it could be principles, it could be criteria, concepts, words that we use to live together. So togetherness for human beings is very much related with values. And those values are important to build, to enable, to construct, to stratify information, identity, sense of belonging. And they can also destroy all this. Ideas are much more viral than COVID.
Yeah, great summary.
Great.
All right, I think we should probably wrap it up. Thanks so much for that wonderful last question.
Can I say one thing before we quit?
Sure you can, Mike.
Run it back over to me, please.
I will. Okay, you
Just
can
coming-
take it from here, Carolyn.
No, go ahead, Dr. Kerr. Thank you,
Just
Margaret.
coming back from the idea of sense of self, I forget what phrase you used, but I think it's always important to remember that the key thing is gaining some emotional objectivity about a process and then taking action on it. And that's when the changes occur from the action, but you can't do the action without the objectivity. Maybe you're aware of that, but I just thought it might.
No, that's helpful. Helps me put in perspective, and then you can name those different actions as values or.
Sure. Yeah, just that you stand by them.
Okay, Kathy's got her hand raised. Do I dare, Carolyn? Okay, 1 minute, Kathy, 1 minute.
No, I can do it quicker. I
do
think
this.
somebody planted Tanya in the audience to ask that question because it's really a really important question. I want to know who planted her. Really nice
Yeah.
summary question. And I thought Mike Kerr's response and Marta Bartoloso's were right on the money.
All right, thanks for the wonderful last question and responses and the wonderful panel, and my thanks. Hats off to Carolyn. Dr. Jacobs will take it from here, but you have been the heavy lifter in this conference and so much appreciated.
Could
Well,
I
thank
just,
you.
Carolyn, before you start, one thing I don't want to forget
Okay.
about how we got in touch with Dr. Bartoloso. I was having a lot of trouble with getting through to her with emails.
Yeah,
And,
true.
and Lana took the trouble to make the connections. And that was the first meeting we had, with included Lana, me, and Dr. Bertoloso. So thanks, Lana, for your part in just making all this happen.